Awesome. Well, happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is gearing for the weekend. We just lost one person. But all that being said, this is going to be the last session of training from from what we have in our notes. So a couple of things we've just touched on just to send a quick recap. Obviously we've built out the orders, we've built out the line items, we built out the creative, we built out the audiences, and those are really the four major components of building out the DSP. So hopefully by now you more or less feel comfortable being able to dive into the platform, clicking around, and really understanding where everything is. Worst case, we may have some extra time today, so I can actually dive into an account just to walk you through exactly how to do some of the navigation there and paint that whole picture. Because I know we've been going through part by part, how do you build an order? How do you build an audience? But none of it has really lined up yet. So that's something that I do want to cover off on today. So just recapping on the last meeting, we talked through an element of building out the line items, and that was a big part of it. But we also wanted to walk through optimizing, as optimizing is a big part of DSP as well. How do you increase or decrease pace? How do you improve performance? And we also want to talk through custom reporting and what you can get through there. Any questions so far? Anything else you would like to see on this last session? I know, Amy, based on our conversations, there's going to be some more hands-on type trainings as we approach into the next month. But in the interim, just wanted to make sure there's nothing else I have to add to my list. I can cover off on today.
I don't think so yet. You never know.
All right, for sure. When they do inevitably come up, please feel free to just shoot me a note. I can go ahead and cover off on more topics. It's no worries at all. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. Before I get started, actually, correct me if I'm wrong. Did we get to cover through on reporting last week, or was that something that we haven't done just yet? I know we wanted to touch on it, but I don't know if we got to it. Does anyone remember?
No, it was like some optimizing then reporting that we're going to go together is what we're going to do today.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Cool. Thank you for the update there. I will go ahead and dive into the optimizing part to close off on that note. I'll just repeat a little bit of what I touched on the last 5 to 10 minutes on last week's call, just so everyone's kind of looking at this with a fresh mind. So getting started with that, optimizing, there's really two major ways of optimizing for the DSP. There's the pacing element and there's the performance element. I do recall mentioning last week that increasing in your pace is a lot more difficult than decreasing in your pace, right? Compared to sponsored ads, in general, you're going to have to be a lot more creative. It's not as, it's not as easy as just creating a campaign, plugging in like a, high performing keyword and just letting that fly, for however many days. And that's kind of a repacing. But for the DSP, there's also a lot of additional elements to go with that. So one of the first things that I generally do from a pacing perspective is I check out the line item delivery. So for example, let's just hop into Gerber. You can see that there are a lot of columns here, and one of them is a delivery rate, right? This is going to be your indication on how your orders are delivering, right? If it's delivering at 100%, great, that's perfect. I wish sponsored ads had something like this, but if it's delivering at, let's just say 50 or 70%, what that would mean is that what that would mean is based on the flight that you set and the current date, what percent are you to spending that full budget? And if you have a delivery rate of 70%, let's just say you're going to spend, by the end of that projected flight budget, you're only going to be spending 70% of that. That is something that you have to adjust for, because when you have this many orders like a Gerber does, there's going to be a lot of management involved just to make sure you're on pace, right? DSP also has a lot of fluctuations within their spend. Occasionally, they do spend relatively evenly, but on occasion, there are things that could go wrong. Like, for example, if IBGuard and FDGuard, part of the Nestle dropdown, one thing that we just ran into was the creative, because it's in such a sensitive category, we can't actually use custom targeting, right? We did know that from the start, but we wanted to try it out anyway. Surprisingly to us, for the last 22 days or so since we launched the campaigns in April, we were able to actually run those campaigns. But as I did the pacing a couple of days ago, what we really quickly realized was that those creatives actually just got rejected after 3 weeks of running. Those creatives got rejected. So we had to look at the pacing and understand why it didn't spend in the last 2 days and have to reshift our strategy, right? We had to build some new campaigns, reshift the targeting to only do contextual so that it would run again. Right, so those are the things that I would recommend just taking a look at. In general, the pacing profile, if everything is set up correctly, it should be relatively standard, but there are relatively unnatural instances that come up, which you just have to account for. That's why it's important to always keep an eye on these campaigns. But going back to, oh yeah, go ahead.
Ryan, would you explain, like, for some people, I know like there's a lot of restricted categories within Amazon, you and I know this, but explain like when it is restricted, that contextual being O&O, like where it actually shows up if people ask. Because if they can't launch something that's a restricted product, where is that campaign actually going to be able to show up?
Great question. So there's a lot of different types of restrictions from Amazon's perspective. There are some restrictions where you can't even advertise at all, right? So we ran into this with like adult products, weapons, like guns, any kind of like weaponry, alcohol. I think those are all relatively restricted categories. Those categories fall into a spot where you cannot even place an ad anywhere. But, Amy, to your point, with sensitive categories like IbGuard, where it talks about IBS, those are a little bit trickier because Amazon does allow you to advertise them, but only in certain places, to your point, Amy, right? And where this comes a little bit more into play is normally if I click into any of these orders, you would likely see 6 line items, right? You have your desktop O&O, desktop APS 3P, and the combination of like mobile app, mobile web, as well as O&O and 3P. But if I clicked into a contextual targeting, you can only actually serve contextual targeting on O&O sources, right? So let's just take a look at these real quick. The first 2 dimensions of our names will always have your placement or what device type you are, which is denoted by the D, and then the S is the supply source. So if it's O&O, if it's APS and 3P, you only have those 2 options to choose from, and that's the way that we break it down. So contextual targeting, if you actually hover over contextual targeting as a targeting option, it's going to say you can only serve on O&O, right? Anything that Amazon is owned and operated. So if you imagine just shopping on Amazon.com, right? As a reminder, back to our line item training, contextual targeting is any time someone is searching your product or is on a product detail page that's contextually relevant to the product that you're advertising, right? What that could mean is, let's just say you are, you're advertising IbGuard in the sense, right? They don't send you a list of what they're going to be targeting, but I can imagine there's going to be a lot of gut-related nutrition, dietary supplements in that regard, where this ad is going to show up anytime someone searches for that or lands on those product detail pages. So how you set that up is you would actually only have 3 line items in this case per order. You would have your mobile app O&O, your desktop O&O, and your mobile web O&O, and you wouldn't select any targeting at all, right? You know how most of these you have to create custom audiences, associate that, et cetera, et cetera. For contextual targeting, I can just hop into one real quick just to show you. Desktop O&O, line item settings, perfect. So instead of having, an audience like here, it would just be blank, but you would add an extra layer of targeting. There's the contextual within the placement option here. And then right here, it says auto target pages of related products. So it's effectively like auto targeting equivalent to sponsored ads, but it's better than nothing, right? I think IbGuard and FDGuard would probably want to do some form of advertising than just have the campaign shut off completely. So that's the option and the route that we took. Go ahead and cancel that out real quick. And I'll back out of here. So where does this serve actually? If I wanted to get more specific into those types of details, well, it will serve on if you go into the search engine results page, I think the first place you would see that is on the left-hand rail. There's this long billboard type ad. It's called a 160 by 600. You've probably seen that before, and that's going to be most of the time a display placement, and it's usually contextually targeted. Doesn't have to be, because you do have access to that as well with custom targeting, but that's one of the places that will show, right? It serves just as any normal custom audiences will also serve. So just want to make that point clear as well. So pause there for a sec. Any questions on that note, kind of where it would serve? Great question, Amy. Perfect. So kind of jumping back into it, that's like one very rare instance that would happen where your creatives just get rejected, your ad stops showing completely, and you kind of have to switch gears. But that's one of the many ways Amazon's going to make you have to look at this a little bit more and pace your spending up, right? So, to what I mentioned earlier, delivery rates, they normally don't show a percentage at the order level, which is quite annoying. I'd love to see from my account, at a quick glance, which of these orders, or like campaigns, as you like to call it, is pacing well. If I were to draw any kind of equivalent metaphor, that's like looking at your pacing on a campaign level, but your line items are at an ad group level, right? On sponsored ads. You could see the pacing here, the delivery rate. If you're hovering around like the high 90s, that's usually a really good spot to be in. Occasionally, you would see things jump over 100%, which is completely okay. It's nothing of a concern, because if you're already capping the budget at an order level, that you don't have to worry about overpacing, right? And that's one of the things that I touched on last week as well. In DSP, you would almost never overpace unless there were things that went wrong. If it goes wrong, it's likely on Amazon's side, and that's when you should contact your AE to ask for any kind of adjustment to the invoices, delivery credits, added value campaigns, make goods, if you do see that you spent above what you have budgeted. So all that being said, this campaign doesn't need to be touched. I have full confidence in that it's going to serve all the way to the end of this flight, right? And the flight for this is going to be this month. One thing I want to touch on a little bit, however, is the difference between the total budget and the flight budget. So how I'd recommend you setting this up, and it's going to be different, so you might have a different opinion on this, but I've seen some advertisers out there that use the word a campaign in a way that they only run the campaign for a set duration of time, and it's not an evergreen type campaign, right? I think that's in essence like the traditional way of using it. We just look at it a bit differently. So in that sense, if let's just say you're running it from April 15th to May 15th, right? Still a month period, but some odd dates. Brands might give you a budget because they have a promotion during that time where they just want you to run it, right? So there's no necessity to run it from an April 1st, the start of a clean month. But in those instances, because we do things a little bit differently, and because our campaigns are evergreen, the total budgets will continue to add up. Right. I was actually running into this issue, and Amanda can back me up on this. We were talking with Amazon this last Tuesday, and they had some form of suggestions in changing up the flights and the budgets. Right. We weren't really seeing eye to eye in that instance, only because our setup is a little bit different, and we define our campaigns and our flights a little bit differently. So what do I exactly mean by that? So do you see how here we're spending about 13K from a total cost perspective, and our total budget is 33K? I mean, if our budgets are set for the month, it looks like we're severely underpaced because there's only 1 or 2 days left within this month. However, this number here is not an accurate representation of what you are spending for this particular campaign for the month, right? Gerber operates on a month-to-month basis where our budgets refresh every month. More or less, it does stay consistent, but it's also nice to track whenever there's any kind of adjustments that need to be made. So all that being said, 33K is not the monthly budget. you would have to go into your order settings and look at what you set up for the flight. So I set 13K as my monthly budget. If you actually look here, for my flight that I set up, it's also 13K, right? So I actually only have $846 left to spend in the next 2 days. And that's why the delivery rate is very close to 100%. So I'm estimating in the next 2 days, we're going to be spending about like $423 a day, right? And then when we go into May, that's when I would try to recalculate all the different orders, what I spent, and based on some of the learnings, how I want to redistribute these budgets, right? The budgets, you can change them anytime, like mid-month. DSP will automatically recalculate how it should pace for that and either increase or decrease your spend. If like, let's just say I decided to bump this budget up by double, right? We're spending 26K now for the month of April, but I only have about a day and a half left. DSP is actually going to try its best to spend up to that 26K because you set that as your order budget and you gave them that time frame to spend it in, right? So it's going to freak out a little bit, and it's going to take about a day or two to adjust to that spend level. So oftentimes, I don't like to use the term set and forget it, but that's how the order budgets will serve the most properly. Anytime you're making a lot of changes to here, the DSP system doesn't like it. It does affect performance slightly, right? We do notice that, it has to kind of recalculate and reoptimize based on the goals that you set, right? So for example, if your goal is awareness and reach, it's going to have to understand, okay, which of these line items was doing well again, and it has to remember all of that, and usually takes a couple of days to adjust. So that's why always important. I would recommend just spending a few days before you're actually launching the campaigns to understand what you want to allocate to the different orders. That way, you're going to be able to pace more evenly throughout the month. It's just going to build a more consistent pacing profile. Pause there for a sec. Any questions? Perfect. So looking into different ways of increasing pace, I touch on these, but I'm just going to cover through on it in the next couple of minutes. You can add strategy, right? So when you're pacing at an account level all up, I like to use Gerber as an example because I've been working pretty closely on this one. There's a couple of different groups. There's baby formula, there's baby food, and there's probiotics. So how I would look at that is I would download all this data and I would try to understand how it's pacing, right? Sometimes baby formula might be pacing a little bit more heavily than baby food, but due to the restrictions of the P&L, I cannot shift the budgets around. So I have to go into baby food and understand where I can expand some strategy, right? I then look at that and understand, okay, well, I have a lot of remarketing campaigns going on. I have a lot of in-market campaigns going on. What more can I do to increase this pace? A lot of the times I wouldn't recommend this, but there are ways where you can increase your frequency cap or increase your bids to help you get there. I don't think that's a smart idea because if you already know that the ideal frequency cap is like a 7-to-1 on any given day, and that's set at either the line item or the order level, if it's already 7-to-1 and you're trying to spend more here, trying to showcase this more to a consumer probably isn't going to do any good for them. It's going to send more reminders, but I'm sure all of you had your fair share of very horrible display ads targeting, where you're on a page and you see an ad 30 times. Just a very bad experience. And the last thing we want to do is give any one of our brands, and those shoppers of those brands, that type of experience, right? Amazon, I'm not sure where they're getting this, to be honest, but they've been trying to recommend uncapping your frequency unless you're in the middle of a tentpole event like Prime Day, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. You have a 1 to 2 day campaign that you're just running. I wouldn't recommend doing an uncapped frequency only because Amazon will spend as much money as you give it to them, right? This is your way of limiting that and providing a good customer experience. So Amazon generally recommends 7-to-1 on any given day, but during Prime days, you can bump that up to 14. And I think the explanation of having an uncapped makes a lot more sense during then. But because Amazon called out to us that we had some lines that were pacing a little bit lower, they said, why don't you uncap your frequency? Well, I pushed back and said, well, I think we would add strategy instead, right? I think a lot of brands would be much more keen in understanding we have the capability of targeting a separate audience and learning more info with that dollar amount than just to spend continuously on that same exact audience, right? Who might get sick of that ad unit. Right. So adding strategy is a big part of it. And anytime you're pacing low, that's probably the first place I would go after everything else is optimized. If you know your frequency cap is set to summarize, if you know that the bids is probably as high as you want to go, then you want to look to what strategies you're missing out on. And that's when you can start developing new ones and reshifting some of that budgets from the old orders that are pacing a little bit more slowly and into this new one. Any questions on adding strategy? Perfect. But as I mentioned, increasing frequency caps is an option, not recommended if you already know exactly what frequency cap you want to set it at. Alternatively, you can set it at a per hour option. This isn't going to affect your pacing in any way. It's just a different way of looking at frequency. So I'll go into it again. I keep hopping in and out of this, but you do have the option of setting the frequency cap by hour. I think I touched on this really quickly. So if you are setting up like this, what this could potentially mean is you could serve 7 impressions in one go. Someone's on a page and they're scrolling around. There is a chance that within the same session of them scrolling on that page, they can see your ad 7 times and they're already capped out for the day. What we've been trying to explore a little bit here is a per hour type of methodology. So instead of, showing no more than 7 times for one day, what if you did something like 1 out of 3.5 hours, right? If you do the math, that's actually equivalent to serving 7 times a day, but you're just spacing your impressions out a little bit more, right? So a little bit off topic, but still can help increase your pacing if you want to change it to a per hour basis, so that you're spacing it out instead of giving a shopper that type of bad experience of kind of flooding their page with your ads. Another option that you can go into is to open up your viewability. So let me just go into an order that has some form of spend to it. And then I'll hop into a line item. I mentioned this in the line item targeting. So this is going to be a bit of a refresher of a course for that line item section, but viewability is a section that you would click into here. And essentially, this would be based off of what Amazon and the exchanges classify as what is viewable, right? So what that means is if based on the page that they're on, if you have a page that it will take you like a minute to scroll all the way to the bottom, that is going to be a viewability of probably like a 10 to 20%. So what you're trying to say here is, well, if you want your ad to be extremely viewable, of course, the cost is going to be higher, right? Because the chances of you serving on a page that they just land on without having to scroll, you would optimize that by clicking in 70% of greater, right? So it's not going to serve your ad at the very bottom of the page where it's like totally unseen. You have some very prime inventory positions if you were to serve on something like this. But keep in mind that this is also very competitive. So eCPMs are high, and there's also a limited amount of inventory. A third note that I want to make, and this is a common mistake that I see for DSP advertisers, is that they start with 70% and greater, and that just completely restricts the amount of servability they have, right? So, they want to be extremely visible, but they're spending $1,000 per campaign, whereas they should be spending $10,000 a campaign, right? The recommendation here to increase your pace is to start dropping your viewability, right? And keep in mind that your ad doesn't actually get charged until it loads, right? So until they see it. And generally your ad isn't going to load at the bottom of the page if they haven't scrolled to that point just yet. So that is one thing that I would say. The second part to that, so kind of a sub note, is that there are a lot of websites and exchanges that don't actually classify what viewability means. The problem there is if they don't classify it, there's actually no way of understanding if it's 70% and above, 60% and above, and etc. So you're limiting your inventory source again. If they don't classify it, you wouldn't even serve there, right? Even if it's a really great site and they don't have, they never had their viewability set up, the exchanges just don't know what to do in that case and just won't serve your ad there. All right. So if you are pacing quite low, you can hit allow all, and that just serves anywhere that's possible. And that's usually a pretty normal option, right? If you don't even have this viewability targeting, it's going to automatically default to allow all. Amazon generally recommends this, but if you have a brand that's very specific into their viewability settings, that's how you adjust that here. But in general, I wouldn't recommend touching this if not needed. But if, for example, you do run into a case where your brand tells you that you need to set 70 and above and you're pacing light, decreasing that pacing, decreasing that viewability into like a 60%, 50%, even to an allow all is going to help you increase that pace. Just gonna hop out of there. Another option to increasing your pace is to improve your retargeting windows, right? A lot of the audiences that you'll see that we created have a standard 30-day window, right? Occasionally, to optimize to improve your performance, you can shrink that window depending on your product. Or if you are dealing with a product that has a higher ASP, the consideration window of purchasing this product from, first initial search to actually conversion is a lot longer. Well, you want to try expanding the window to see if you can capture more audiences, right? Because all of this is audience based. It's really depending on how many people get captured in your custom audience. So if you're expanding the window from like a 30 to a 60 day, well, suddenly you have almost twice the amount of audiences that you can target to, right? Again, this isn't something that I would recommend if you already know that your prime audience buys within the first like 7 days, let's just say, because the more you extend your window, well, the chances are they either bought that product from a different channel or they just weren't interested, but they're going to continuously see your ad, right? Some cases, you can do a little bit more testing to see if conversions improve as you're expanding this window. You would need to recreate the audience and set the product views to 60 days instead of 30 days. But you can test that out to see if conversions increase, or alternatively, you can also just look at the other pacing options to help increase your pace. Right. So increasing your retargeting windows is a pretty good pretty good area to look if you feel like your audience isn't 100% solidified in that is the top performing audience or window that you can target. Speaking of audiences, there's actually another element within the reports, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, called untargeted audience, right? So a lot of you might recognize the term lookalike audiences or overlap audiences. And the DSP allows for you to generate a report to see your audience level performance, as well as your untargeted, right, performance. And I'll walk through that. I'll actually download an example so that you're able to see that later. But adding in untargeted audiences that have a high detail page view rate and putting that into like your in-market or your lifestyle segments will increase your audience size and help with that servability as well. Right, so those are the couple of ways to help increase your pace. You can add strategy, you can increase your frequency cap, you can increase your base supply bids, you can open your viewability to make it less restrictive. You can open up your retargeting windows by, by taking the same subsection of ASINs and just making it like a 60-day instead of a 30-day. Or you can go into your reports and grab additional untargeted audiences to sort by detailed page view rates. Pause there for a sec. That is increasing pacing for optimization. Any questions there? All right, perfect. So let's talk about decreasing pace. In general, decreasing pace and improving performance kind of go hand in hand with each other. You probably wouldn't have the both together. And when you improve performance, you're likely going to be decreasing your pace. So anytime you see a line item serve above 100%, you already know that your audience is big enough. And now you probably just need to cut back cut back on it. But the beauty there is as you're cutting back, you're likely going to be improving your performance as well. Case in point, there's a couple of things you can do, which is the exact opposite of increasing that pace. So I mentioned your base supply bids. Instead of setting your base supply bids to a certain amount and increasing it, you can actually decrease it, make it less competitive. You probably won't get as great of an inventory source, but to be honest, I haven't seen a big difference in performance when you do that. But that's going to help you, A, decrease your pace, and B, improve your performance. You can also increase your frequency cap or decrease your frequency caps, serve less often. Instead of 7 a day, can you serve 5 a day and still get away with that? Well, in general, again, depending on how frequently you determine an audience needs to see your ad before conversion, right? You can look at that with AMC data. That is going to be your indication on whether or not you should be decreasing your pace there. You can also make your viewability more restrictive instead of like less restrictive. So let's just say you allow all, right? And then your line items are pacing at like 120%. Can you move that to like a 50 and above? Perhaps that will decrease your line item pace and also make your ad serve on a little bit more premium of inventory. That's going to cost a little bit more, but at the same time, that's going to help decrease your pace and optimize in that way. You can also go into your like sites and supply, right? There's another report that I'll showcase to you later where you can actually check out your different inventory sources that you're serving on and actually look at from like a site perspective or an exchange perspective, what's actually serving well and what's not serving well. Well, you might find that your ad serves better on some sites versus others, right? Some are a little bit more relevant than others. So what you can do is actually take those and put them into your blacklist. Right, you can actually blacklist those sites so that you never serve there anymore, and you can change that on the order level, on the entity level, and what have you. So that's decreasing pace and what can help you slow down your pacing a little bit. But again, to summarize that point, in general, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, I would even say, you're going to be increasing pacing because it's too slow. But on the off chance that you're serving way too hot, again, you're not going to overspend what you put into your order. If you do, that's something I would 100% recommend taking up with the Amazon rep and seeing what they can do from a make good perspective, because they over delivered on your ad and now you may or may not owe your clients money. Jumping into performance, there's a couple of ways to improve your performance, and those are kind of overlapping with what I mentioned just now about decreasing pace. So for example, going into your orders, if you wanted to decrease your frequency cap, and that you're being a little too aggressive right now, you can actually decrease that on both the order and line item level, just to help out with that. You can also decrease your base supply bid. That's going to help improve performance. Think of that as decreasing your bids on sponsored ads. Well, generally, you likely see better performance because it now costs less to reach every individual shopper if your conversion stays about the same. Also, if you exclude, sites and supply sources that are not doing well, you're only serving on prime inventory now. That's going to help you improve your performance as well. And one thing that is different with all of this, jumping into my last point in improving performance, is optimizing and pausing creatives and line items. So this is a bit of a new topic. Going into like a line item, for example, actually, let me find one that has DEA. Give me 1 second. DEA that's serving. Let's go into this one right here. So going into your line items, or actually, let me hop back out to an order level. I need to find one that's serving a DEA. Apologies for the background noise. We just had someone come in through our garage. It's a little loud. Yeah, no, these are RECs. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. I'm going to find one with the DEA because it's going to make a lot more sense, I promise. All right, so let's just say you hop into an order and you have 6 different line items and all of them are also showing DEA ads. what you can do is actually take a look at those individual line items and pause the line items if they're not performing well, right? So let's just say that you that on like a desktop O&O, for example, I mean, that one almost never performs poorly, but let's just say you go into like a mobile web APS and 3P, you're serving all across the web, and you notice that the returns there are probably like a fifth of what you can get on desktop O&O. Well, you can actually pause that line item, and what the orders will do is they'll actually redistribute among the other 5 line items how it should serve to meet that delivery rate, to meet your order budget, right? So you can pause it on the line item level if it's not performing well after you do all those different types of optimizings. But alternatively, what you can also do is jump into each individual line item. So I'll click into that real quick, and it'll go into the creatives. And what you can do is check out within this line. So mobile apps have 3 creatives associated with them. You can actually look to see, how each of these are performing on a creative level. So you can take a look at this, and you will immediately notice that on the mobile app, a 728 by 90 on the APS and 3P, the different exchange sources are did not, attribute to a single sale, right? Sale, I would say, is probably not the first metric to look at, even though I call that out, but I would look at click-through rates, right? Click-through rate performance, just based on the way that DSP attributes data, it's on a last click attribution. So even though they could have originally seen an ad on a 728 by 90, if they went back onto a desktop like O&O and they decided to buy from, from the browser, that would actually steal the sale, but this would still get charged for an impression, right? So that last click attribution methodology. So even though that this shows 0 sales, I would be a bit hesitant in pausing this because click-through rates is actually better than serving on a 300 by 250, right? So I'll take a look at this a little bit more carefully on a creative by creative level to see if there's any you can pause. And then for this one, I have to understand why this is not working. There could be some form of moderation that didn't make this go through. There are some restrictions from an ad unit perspective where you can say where you have to put like a logo on one. You have to put like, or actually, let me backtrack. There are some placements where you can include a headline, and there are some placements where you cannot include a headline, right? And this is probably pending because a 320 by 50 is a very, very small ad unit, and it likely doesn't have room for a headline. My guess is that there is a headline associated to this that we would take out, and that would make this approved. Right, so just some small nuances there. But for all intents and purposes, this is also why we build out DEAs, for example, instead of RECs, right? So looking back like 2 sessions ago or even 3 sessions ago, the reasons why you build out DEA so that you can look at the performance at this level and pause creatives individually. Alternatively, if you use an REC, you would actually only see one line, right? And the question there is, how do you optimize for one line, right? Do you just pause it throughout? You don't get the performance on an individual ASIN level. So what do, right? Your hands are pretty tied in being able to optimize for RECs. So on occasion, if you're working with a brand that has a decent sized budget that, we want to spend a little bit more time on, I would recommend putting in DEAs. But if you're working on a brand that just has an enormous portfolio of products, RECs is definitely the way to go to make it a quick build. But then you can always use the other optimization levers to assist with that. So that's pretty much about it from an optimizing perspective. The 2 major elements is pacing and performance. Right, we went through increasing your pacing, which is the most common, and also decreasing pace, which is a lot less common, as well as improving performance. Any questions there before I move into reporting? All right, awesome. So let's jump into reporting. The last 20 minutes we have. Oh boy, does time fly. So looking at reporting, there's a couple of things that's I would call out compared to like a sponsored ads that you might be traditionally used to. So sponsored ads reporting is going to be on a entity by entity level, right? As in, when you go and generate a report in sponsored ads, everyone who logs into that entity will see that report, right? If you generate a really silly report and you make a mistake, everyone will be able to see that, right? On the DSP, however, these reports are going to be generated on a user by user level. This is very important because I know that a couple of you might work on an account together. And if one person generates a report, the other person will likely not be able to see it. So you have to make sure when you're generating these reports, you're actually sending the reports to someone else. Now, I still haven't tested this in all my time working on the DSP, but I don't believe the settings will port over either. So if you are the one who's generating the report, what you can do is schedule reports to send to someone else, but they won't be able to change the settings, right? So just a important call out there before I jump into this. You just really, really want to make sure, as you are, as you're making these reports and you have multiple people working on the account, just know that it's going to be on a user by user level when you're generating this instead of an entity by entity level. Cool. Jumping into reporting now, there's a couple of reports that I want to showcase to you. So they've changed this dashboard quite a bit of times the last couple of years. Before, you were really only able to generate you weren't able to generate custom reports. In fact, they were called all data reports. There was a set pre-list that had performance report, audience segmentation report, brand halo report, right? There was a couple of different reports that were already preset for you, but now Amazon has opted for you to generate custom reports every time. Is it better? I don't know. I kind of disagree with that, only because because a lot of the times, most users were already used to downloading a performance report and having those columns already preset for them. If you're generating a custom report, you're going to have to change up the columns every single time. So unless it's a recurring thing, make sure that you remember which columns you adjust for, because I've seen this in the past. We've had multiple people try to generate the same report, but sometimes they forget one column and they're trying to paste the data under a previous week, and suddenly those columns don't align. It's a massive headache to try to realign which columns go with what, and which ones you add in, right? So you can see here, there's I want to say some of them have up to 400 different metrics you can include in the columns. And they're all customizable. So missing one is already going to be a pretty big headache. But all that being said, I'll start off from the top. Let me just zoom in a bit here. From a filters perspective, in general, you would always want to click this, because unless you were looking at the entity all up with all the different advertisers in here and the data within it, you probably are just going to be looking at your specific brand. So going into filters, let's just say I wanted to do Gerber, right? I can create this advertiser, or if I wanted to do Sound United, this is a good example of brands that have multiple advertisers. So let's just say Jason Oman wanted to look at Sound United. Well, I would click on Denon. I would also click on Polk, DT, and Bowers and Wilkins. And I would generate a report for this. This is essentially going to mash up all those data points together in one place. But for Gerber, because we only have one advertiser, well, that's essentially all that we need. All right, so just going to go back into this. From an orders perspective, in general, you can just download all orders and then just sort them back out from a pivot table. Or if you wanted to specifically see baby formula or baby food, like a product level performance, you can actually go into filters, search the order by name, and then select the orders that way. Alternatively, you can scroll through this list and click on each one individually, though I would not recommend that. But if I went through baby formula, and I knew this because my product says baby formula, and those are all the campaigns there, I can actually click on those. And then as it continues to sort more properly, you can see that only baby formula would pop up, and you would just click through all of them to add. I mean, alternatively, I have a workbook already set up where I split each of these individual orders into its own respective groups. And that way, anytime I download the data, I just run a quick index match or VLOOKUP formula so I can pull that together and then sort that on a pivot table so I don't have to bother with filtering for orders. Going into the dimensions, there are a couple of reports. So dimensions is where you generate the different types of reports. Now there's a few, right? There's your campaign report that you see here. There's also an inventory report. There's a geography, audience, technology, and product. So I'll kind of walk through each one and kind of what they tell you so that you know exactly when to use which ones. So campaign reports is probably the most commonly used one. That one shows your data at an all up. And of course, all these breakdowns will show each line individually. It'll show, okay, within this order, within that order, you have your line item. Within that line item, you have a creative. Within that creative, that's the performance that you see across that line, right? And it's going to do that for every single order that you have within the DSP. It will show the main dimensions. If you build granularly enough, I think this is a really great place to start doing your weekly, biweekly, monthly reportings with your clients. Campaign reports is generally the one that's going to tell you everything you need to know about what's going on in your account from a top level. Inventory, this is where I talked a little bit about improving performance. So I mentioned, can you exclude any kind of sites and supplies? So if you download an inventory report, you'll notice that there's actually the breakdowns just changed here. Instead of just order, line item, creative, you added site, supply, and deal. Adding that dimension in there will allow you to see from each of these, on each of these levels, how is that performing, right? Through a quick pivot, you can actually sort through the data and understand exactly what's performing well, what's not performing well. You can take that list, pop that back into your blacklist, and that is one form of advertising for performance. Geography is also a very interesting report. I mean, considering that Vendor Central now, I think it's Vendor Central, they removed under brand analytics, I think they removed the geography section. So you can't really actually see how your conversions are doing now. This is really, really awesome for, some brands that are more seasonal. Like if you work with brands that are in allergy care or outdoor products, like something that's sports related, in general, those are summer months, right? Allergy is springtime. But what you can do is check out the conversion rates from a click-through rate perspective, detail page through rate perspective, ROAS perspective, and really understand as you're pulling this week over week or month over month, how is the conversion looking when you're looking at it by city or postal code or even state? I would imagine if you're car care, your conversions or your click-through rates start to improve as you're going further and further north. Well, this is really going to be helpful when you understand your campaigns, because this will directly influence what you should negatively target, either blacklist or whitelist, when you're running mid to upper funnel campaigns. So let's just say that I know that because the season's warming up right now, we work with a brand that's in the car care space, and we want to be very strategic with our mid to upper funnel dollars and just really making sure that we're not serving to, the northern parts of Maine, right? So starting from California and Florida and working our way upwards, when should we start activating and whitelisting certain zip codes so that they're able to, serve more properly, right? And this is a dimension of a report that you can utilize to affect that type of strategy. Moving on to the next one, this is audience. So audience is equivalent to that audience segmentation report. This one is the best report, I would say, when it comes to coming up with new ideas and different strategies and tactics, right? So some reports that you'll see here is what you are targeting and what you're not targeting, right? So as I mentioned earlier, overlap, lookalike, those should be terms that you're probably familiar with. When you are looking at all of these orders, for example, for Gerber, and you're pulling an audience report, it's going to be able to showcase to me in terms of what I'm not targeting from a brand affinity perspective, right? From a detail page view rate perspective on things and from orders that from audiences that I'm currently not targeting, what has the highest amount of detail page view rates? Now, I would take the data with a grain of salt, right? As each of you pull this, you'll start to understand when you download the report, you would see some very, very random audiences that have high detail page rates, right? Sometimes baby formula, you would see that there would be like an in market for desktop that has the highest detail page rates, and you're like, how is this even related, right? So take the data with a grain of salt. It does require a little bit of going through with a fine-tooth comb, but once you start, decreasing or sorting your detail page rates from descending to ascending, right, from highest to lowest, you'd be able to see from an affinity standpoint which other opportunities there are, so that you can help improve your targeting, right? Help improve your pacing as well, right? Coming up with new strategies. So technology, this one isn't used very often, to be completely honest. I mean, just looking at the dimensions that it gets you, like device type, browser versions, operating system, environment type. I mean, if you wanted to dive that deeply into like an optimizing level, I would say this is probably going to take a good chunk of your time. If you were to dive into here, I would say all the optimizations that I mentioned earlier is already going to take care of like 95 to 99% of the performance. If you wanted to optimize like slightly further, you can look at this and download this dimension as well, and take a look at how you want to negate certain device types. Although from a device types perspective, you can already see that on an order level. So this is kind of a duplication of effort to download and analyze this type of data. So this one's not used very often. I mean, I guess if you're trying to sell like a CE product, like a desktop or a phones, you'd probably want to understand if you should introduce a new PC model on someone who's using a PC currently instead of like a Mac operating system, or if you should just exclude Mac operating systems completely, right? That's a very rare scenario, but there's a ton of PC brands out there, and this is maybe a way that I can see them using something like this. And then last but not least is one of my favorite reports. It's the brand halo report, right? Why this is one of my favorites is because I get asked from brands all the time. So, when you look at like the order level, you have your product sales and then you have your total sales. What exactly does that mean, right? So I'll jump into like a Gerber real quick. What exactly does that mean when there's like a product sales, and how some of these have like a 4.23 to 1, but then when you look at total sales, suddenly that jumps up quite a bit. So I don't think, total raws, I mean. Why does this one have a 4.23 and why does this one have a 9.2? Why is that? From a product sales standpoint, it's only 15K versus 33K. I guarantee you, all of you are going to have those conversations. And that is an absolute statement. All of you will have those conversations with your brands and understanding that. So your product dimension is going to help you to find that, right? It's going to help showcase to you in the campaigns that you ran, right, what you actually sell on the orders on the products from within the orders that you tracked, right? Remember, when you're tracking orders, for example, and you're going to here and you're plugging in the different ASINs as you're setting up the order, this is going to be what appears in your product sales, and anything that's within the vendor code that's tied to this entity is what's going to show up from a total sales perspective. So if you wanted to showcase to them the efficacy of DSP and not just how it improves your current sales for the products you're advertising, you can show them that there is an overall brand halo lift, right? One thing you'll notice really quickly is that, talking about brand halo, that's a conversation that you have all the time in sponsored ads. Amazon is pushing very hard this year to get everyone to start looking at total metrics instead, as opposed to what you're just tracking, right? Alternatively, and I won't get into this too much, there are some brands that's going to want you to track things on an ASIN by ASIN level, right? They want to see the media dollars that they've given to you for a particular ASIN. How is that performing with all that said and done? Right. In some other instances, brands are just like, hey, I just want to see how the product group is doing overall. So you track all those different ASINs. But in rare instances, you will get clients that come in that just look at data extremely granularly, and that's the way that you have to build it out. So those are all the different dimensions. Of course, you can change around your time units. There are some reports that you can only pull within like a 30-day period just because of how large it is. I think, I'm trying to remember which one it was. Maybe it was an inventory one. If I try to like go back all the way to last year to do some year-over-year comparisons, I probably won't be able to do that because it's only limited to how many days you're generating, right? Look at the note down here. Geography data is only available for the previous 90 days from the first time, from the time the report is generated. So some of them are, you would have to generate reports every month if you want to have a record of it. Other times it's going to be, you cannot generate a report that's longer than a certain period of time because the file size is just way too big. But as you're kind of clicking through this, there's different time units you can add in. I know we're coming up on time, so I'll just kind of wrap up here. From an available column standpoint, this is the metrics that you're seeing, right? I mean, in general, you have your impressions, clicks, detail page view rates, click-through rate, detail page view rates, sales, ROAS, eCPMs, right? Those are kind of your core metrics, but there's a lot more, and I'd recommend you play around with this, right? You can say, well, when you're running a mid to upper funnel campaign, how does that affect your branded searches? How does it affect your branded searches if they view the ad versus if they click the ad? How much does it cost for each branded search, right? There's a lot of metrics that, DSP gets you that search doesn't. So I'd recommend just kind of downloading everything and just really playing around with, what's kind of important. But for all intents and purposes, 95 to 99% of the time, you're really going to use those core metrics. And then the others are extraneous. So reporting period is down here. You can kind of click through to whatever report period you want. Report name, I hate this one so much because it limits you to 40 characters. The longer the dimensions you have, the more details you want to put into here, you're going to have to find a way to shorten your name in that way so that you can actually generate. It won't even let you generate if your name is past 40 characters. It's horrible. So keep that in mind. And then delivery, you can download this as an XLSX, a CSV, and you can actually send to multiple people as well. If brands want to advertise or look at their own data, you can actually just make it a recurring thing to send to them any given week. And that is a overview of the reporting section. So I'll just give you an example. Look at all these brands that I'm running that I had to shorten the name for, because once it exceeds 40 characters, you just can't do it anymore. Awesome. So I went through a lot. I know it was a bit rushed. I thought we would have a little bit more time, but that is everything from a DSP perspective. Obviously, I think there's still going to be some unanswered questions as you're diving into it a little bit more, but we'll continue to cover through that on a one-on-one session, which I will speak to you, Amy, about and how we want to set that up for this next month. But overall, I hope this was extremely helpful. I had a pleasure being able to kind of walk through this with you. But if there's any other questions at all, feel free to let me know.
Brian, thank you for presenting at Blank Screens for the last 4 weeks. We have all been eagerly, soaking it in quietly.
Awesome. You got it. I had a pleasure.
So guys, like Brian mentioned, I'm reaching out. I'll reach out to you, Joe, Rick, Amanda. Mike, I think Mike's on the phone. I don't remember. The people who are gonna next month, and Jossie the next month, like start to not take over, but do like hands-on with the people. We're gonna come up with this schedule so you can get into your accounts and work with Ryan and the team to start really doing the work before we take over. So we're going to do more of a hybrid thing going on for the next month. So everyone's just like here you go, enjoy. So you'll see. So that's the plan for the next month. So that we have this, everyone's actually working their accounts with the team. So they get a better handle. It's not like here, it's 5-1, enjoy. We're not doing that. So I just wanted everybody to know that. So expect an email. Ryan and I need to get together with that schedule, and we'll go from there, guys. Okay.
All righty.
Great.
Sounds good. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will speak with you all soon.
Happy Friday, everybody.
All right.
Thanks
Happy
so much,
Friday.
Ryan.
All right. You got it. Take care.
Guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ryan.
Bye.